Good morning, friends. I'm putting this message together today to tell you about a new venture that I am beginning. I was thinking about it this morning, and I've thought about it for several years, but I've never really been able to put it into action. But this morning, as I considered one of my Bible studies, it's a group of Sunday school classes, and I have three of them on two different Facebooks and one on Google. And I call it Henry's Online Sunday School for such a time as this. Now, let me just give you a little background on that. About 4 or 5 years ago, I attended a small church. To my dismay, they were a Bible church with no Sunday school. I went there early with the anticipation of being part of the Sunday school, but there was none. And they had been without one for many years, and all they had was a church service with about 10 or 15 people maximum. That was a big crowd that were meeting regular. So I asked if I could become a member and start a Sunday school class. I always wanted to follow through and teach the Sermon on the Mount. I started it years ago, but because I was called to another ministry, I never was able to complete it. So I thought teaching people the Sermon on the Mount would be a good way to start because I don't know why churches don't teach it. It's one of the basic things that Jesus taught his disciples, that what it means to be a child of the kingdom. So I began teaching that class. We had maybe 5 or 6 people that started out and wind up with 2 or 3, maybe 5 maximum every week as we met together. But when the virus came along and they started shutting down the schools and churches and everything else, they shut down my church as well that I was teaching in. So I decided that maybe I can start a Sunday school class online using group ministries. So I called it Henry's Online Sunday School for such a time as this. And so you can see the reason for my title of this. And it's interesting. I had 3 to 5 people in my Sunday school class, but immediately that Sunday school class online started with 9 people. Can you imagine that? I always wanted about 12. I thought 12 would be the ideal class to have, but uh, that was fine with me. Then later on, when I got into Facebook, I started, I have 2 Facebooks. So each of these Facebooks, I started a Sunday school class there, and they have grown. My first one online had 9 people, and the other one I conducted later on had probably about maybe 4 or 5. But over the last 2 or 3 years, those Sunday school classes have really grown. The one online on my Google groups has over 30 people in them. One of my groups that started with 9 people now has 55 members in that class. And the other group that started with 3 or 4 has now grown to about 39. So all total, every week I'm teaching over 100 students a week the Word of God through these Sunday schools. Now, I am just in the process of completing my studies in the book of Isaiah. I have about 3 more lessons to go, and I'm ready to start something different. And so I I decided this morning, as I have been contemplating where to go with these Sunday school groups, what am I going to do next? Well, it just so happens that I started at the request of some pastors in Zambia, starting a discipleship ministry for pastors. Of all things, they're asking a man who's not a pastor, teaching pastors how to do discipleship ministries. And I think the idea behind it, they wanted this group to be part of another group they were giving credentials to. And in order to meet the qualifications, they had to have a course in discipleship. So I fit the bill. But the problem is I wound up dismissing most of the members because they never showed up for meetings and they never showed any interest in being part of the group. So now I have pulled the Gideon or started with a big number, and now I'm down to, in one group, I have about four or five, which had about over 20 to start with. And the other group has about 8 or 9. That's a newer group. So all total, I'm teaching the Sunday school and these discipleship ministries. And I have decided to do something in the next year or more with these groups that will enable them to not only learn the Old Testament and the New Testament, but I'm also teaching them in these lessons how to teach the Bible to others. So in my process of teaching these books, I'm interested in training evangelists or teachers to do the same thing. Now, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, I hope that you will take the time to memorize this verse. It's a very short verse, but Paul the apostle has put forth a strategy of worldwide evangelism in this little verse. Let me read it to you. It says, and he's talking to Timothy. He's facing his near extinction. His beheading is not far away under the awful hands of Nero. And Paul was facing this, and these books, and Timothy was sort of Paul's swan song to Timothy. And here's what he told him. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses. In other words, he's saying to Timothy, you have seen what I've been teaching, what I've been teaching to many people. You've been with me. You've observed it. The things that you have seen of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. What Paul is telling Timothy, he's giving Timothy a plan for worldwide evangelism. Let me explain it. First of all, Paul is the teacher, and he's teaching Timothy. And he's telling Timothy, now, my purpose of doing this with you is to train you to do what I'm doing with you. In other words, I'm training you to do what I want you to do. Now I want you to take what you learned from me and form groups of people and teach them the same thing. And hopefully you will gain from them more evangelists as they put into practice the principle I'm teaching you. In other words, what Paul has put together is a plan for grandparenting. For instance, Paul is a teacher, Timothy is a student, and now he's instructed. Now I want you to take what I have taught you, and I want you to teach faithful men to do the same thing. And I want these faithful men to turn around and do the same thing that I'm doing to you. Now, Dr. James Kennedy started his evangelism explosion using this method. And while I was in Canada, I thought it was a good idea. Of course, because one of our small churches used that method, and their church really began to grow in great numbers very quickly. And not fully understanding the implications of it all, I thought, well, taking this training might not be a bad idea, since I've had such a great results taking place in the community where I was serving as a pastor in Big River. So I decided to go and pay the money and take the course and learn the program. And I started to implement it in my church, and wasn't long before some of my disciples began to drop out. Well, I have learned a lot since then. When I came back to the United States, what I thought was a good idea in Canada turned out to be a terrible monstrosity in the United States. Everybody was using evangelism explosion, and they were using these high pressure methods of evangelism to gain converts. And friends, it has turned out to be a monstrosity that I don't think anyone will ever be able to fix. And I don't think Paul had that in mind when he was teaching that to Timothy. Before I left Canada, I shared what I was doing with some of my fellow pastors. At that time, Joe Aldrich was putting forth a book on lifestyle evangelism that began to gain a lot of popularity. The problem with that program, they were using Campus Crusade Ministry, the four spiritual laws, to conduct the same type of high pressure evangelism. But they warned me about evangelism explosion being too high pressure. And when I got back to the States, I got discouraged from even trying to use it, because it wasn't new anymore. Everybody was doing it. And every Christian that I knew of, apart from those who took part in the program, shied away from ever wanting to share their faith with anybody. So, friends, I don't think Paul ever had that in mind when he told them this. Now, since I came back to the United States, I visited a small church in Saranac, Michigan. Pastor's name was Frank Latimer. He was a prison chaplain, and he was the pastor of this small church. Very talented man and a good man. He eventually died of cancer, and I know he didn't get a chance to finish what he started at that church. But while I was attending that church, he put together an interesting method of teaching the Bible to his Sunday school. He started with Genesis, and he gave a summary of what Genesis is about, and made up discussion questions to have in the class. And it was a very interesting class. And so over the years, after I left that church, I began to put together a book called A Simple Guide for Teaching the Bible. And over the years, I was able to put together the whole Old Testament, book by book, chapter by chapter, in order to teach, to help others to be able to teach the Bible. And in this book, I was using Frank's method to try to teach them how to use this book in order to start Sunday schools of their own. Now, that's my purpose for all of this. Now, in the next few months, starting in January, I still have 2 or 3 more lessons in Isaiah to finish with my present Sunday school class. And what I want to do, and I'm putting this message together for you who are part of these groups. Starting in January, I want to start a series of lessons on how to study and teach the books of the Old Testament. I already have a book on the New Testament I've already shared with my discipleship group. But this is Old Testament book is more in detail. Someday, maybe, if the Lord allows me to live long enough, maybe I should do what I've done in the Old Testament in the New Testament. I've taken the 39 books of the Old Testament and I put them into the form of a Bible survey. And each chapter in the Bible, each chapter or lesson contains one of the books of the Old Testament. It gives a summary of what the book is about, what its purpose is, and I've included discussion questions in order to get the people involved in doing this. Now, I haven't had a chance to use this in a class session as yet, so I thought maybe with my groups I might be able to figure out a way to do this. So I want you to know what I'm doing. I think it's very important that we understand, and I don't think Christians really know this. When they start studying the Bible as new Christians, they usually begin in the New Testament in Matthew. And I say, if you're going to start studying the Bible, start in Genesis and go all the way through to Revelation and start all over again. And I say, read it carefully and slowly and make sure you understand what you're reading. Now, this is what I want to do in these classes. I'm going to put before you a survey of each of the Old Testament books. It's taken me a few years to put this together. One of the pastors in another church was all excited about the idea, but he died before I got a chance to share it with him. So all these things happen in the process. So what I want to do is I want to employ this principle in 2 Timothy 2:2. And hopefully you will be able with these. I'm going to give you lessons. I'm going to give you the written lessons so you can copy them down. And I'm also going to put them on audio so you can listen to them as well as share them with your groups. And they're going to have the questions at the end of each of the sessions. Now, here's my plan. I plan to use each book in two different sessions. For instance, I'll start in the book of Genesis and I'll go all the way through Malachi and do the same thing. I'll start by giving a survey. What is the book of Genesis? What does the book of Genesis teach us? What are we to know about this book? And then I have some questions for the people to think about and answer. Now, what I want to do is in the first session, I will do the survey kind of in a lecture form, and I'll give them copies of that lecture for them to take with themselves. So they'll have it and they can look over it. And I want them to look through the questions and try to answer as many of the questions as possible. Now, in the second session, what I plan to do is to take those questions that I gave to them and dwell on them and talk about them and try to give them some answers to those questions in case they had a hard time figuring it all out. I think if I'm going to give you the questions, somewhere along the line, I should give you some answers so you know what the question. That's the way they did that at Prairie. Our teacher did the same thing using the same inductive method. So I want to do that. Now, there's another option here I think is really interesting, but I've never been able to get anybody to faithfully participate. I have two types of groups that we could meet at one-on-one, meet at one-on-one. For instance, I could arrange for a time for you to meet with me and we can go over the questions, or because you are there live, you could ask me questions back. It's like having a class session that I'm there. Now, I've done this with pastors who live in Zambia. So in order to have an 8 o'clock in the evening meeting, I had to start my message at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. to make it compatible with the various time zones. So you can see some of the difficulties that are involved. But as we go along now, I'll deal more with this. But we can have these meetings, and I can arrange, for instance, maybe we'll meet on a Sunday or a Friday afternoon or evening, and you'll have to determine the time zone you're in. Maybe I'll start the message at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you live in Canada on the west side, it'll be 4 hours later. So that means that in order to take part in this 1 o'clock meeting, you have to meet at 10 or 11 in the morning. And so it'll be compatible. You see what I'm saying? The problem with these group meetings is you have so many time zones involved that it's difficult to find one that's compatible with everybody. But we can do this. I've tried it. Now I find by using these microphones, I can use these messages with backgrounds, and it's easier to listen and hear. So I use this microphone because without it, it sounds like I'm speaking through a tunnel, and it's not very good. Well, I probably have told you everything I want you to know, but I'm doing this to forewarn you, or maybe that's a bad term, to let you know what I plan to do. And it's in January, maybe the first or second week, depends on what we get finished with Isaiah, which is only 3 more lessons. We can begin sometime in January. I'll let you know. And if you're interested in meeting as a group, I'll set up a meeting time and I'll be there if you show up. Your time will be different than mine. If you live in Ontario or Manitoba, maybe it's only an hour's difference or maybe the same time. So a lot varies as to when 2 o'clock is at your particular time. So if you'd like, I will set up a meeting time and I will let you know. And I'll give you the link, and you could save it and click on it for that day if you want to be part of that meeting. Then we can get together and have a nice chinwag to start with. Maybe I'll introduce you to the group and some of the things we could do with it. And then I'll begin our sessions according to your desires. So that's what I have in mind. I want to begin doing something useful, not only teaching you the books of the Old Testament, so you have some idea of what they all teach, but I'm putting together a program that will help you to fulfill the message that Paul gave to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. And I close reminding you, and the things that thou hast heard of me, I'm the teacher, you are Timothy, the same commit thou to faithful men. And believe me, when I say faithful men, sometimes they're hard to find. So Paul was wise in putting it that way. The same commit thou to faithful men who will in turn turn around and do the same thing and teach others. And in the process, those others that they teach will be equipped to do the same thing with those who follow them. So can you imagine the multitude of people that can be reached for Christ using this method? Now, I don't recommend using high pressure evangelism. That only turns out clones, and it's very legalistic, and it doesn't produce mature Christians. It produces like-minded evangelists like themselves who tend to be a little weak in their understanding of the scriptures. So I say that critically because I find it to be true. But I I want things to change. I want people to love the Word of God like I love it and do what I'm doing and be effective. Imagine, friends, when you start using these materials and start teaching, forming your own little groups, you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. Some of those people you teach are going to want to start some groups of their own, and they may multiply you by 50 times. Who knows? I might have 3 people in my group, and they're faithful. They may get 3 more people. I've already multiplied myself 9 times just by teaching 3 people who were faithful. Well, I've talked long enough, but I hope that I got the message across. So look forward to it. We're going to start soon by beginning our study in the book of Genesis. And I'll give you some preliminary teachings first to let you know what we're doing and how to do it and what our plan is. Well, we'll see you later.